They told me I was lucky, a miracle, the 50-year-old woman who survived the impossible. But what I saw in those 7 minutes, it wasn't a miracle. It was a warning. My name is Eliana, and before all of this, my life was simple, the kind that fits in a picture frame. I tended my garden, went to Mass on Sundays, believed that if I did good, good would come back to me. I believed in angels, in reunions after death. I believed in heaven. I give a sad smile, almost ironic, just remembering how foolish I was. My life before the accident was a well-rehearsed script, a script I wrote myself to feel safe. I was a seamstress, you know. I worked from home. My small apartment always had that smell of thread, new fabric, and the coffee I brewed hour after hour. The morning light came through the living room window and hit my sewing machine directly, an old Singer, heavy, that belonged to my mother. That machine was my safe harbor. Its sound, rhythmic and constant, was the soundtrack of my days. I had a son, Marcos, my pride. But Marcos was already a man, with his own life, his own job. We talked almost every day, but they were quick calls. "Hi, Mom, how are you? I'm in a rush. Kiss, love you." And I'd respond, "I'm fine, my son. Take care. Love you too." I'd smile as I hung up, but inside, the silence of the house was heavy, too big for just one person. I knew he loved me, but the truth, which I never told anyone, is that I felt like an old piece of clothing in the back of his closet. Important, with sentimental value, but rarely taken out to be worn. My faith was what filled that void. On Sundays, I'd put on my best dress and go to church. I always sat in the same pew. I didn't pray asking for things. I talked. I told God about missing my mother, about my worries for Marcos. I imagined heaven as a great sewing workshop, where my mother waited for me with a smile, ready to teach me a new stitch. That image gave me peace. It was the promise that loneliness was temporary, that in the end, all the loose threads of life would be tied together. But sometimes, at night, when the only sound was the refrigerator and the city lights painted my bedroom ceiling, doubt would come. I'd look at my hands, already a bit wrinkled by time, and think, is this it? A whole life of work, dedication, to end in a succession of identical days, waiting for a reunion that was just a matter of faith? I felt guilty for thinking that way. I'd shake my head, as if to shoo the thought away, and force myself to remember some Bible passage. That morning, the morning of the accident, I woke up feeling that void more strongly. The sun was shining, birds were singing, but inside me there was a fog. I decided I needed a bit of life, of people. I resolved to go to the market, buy some flowers to brighten the house. I grabbed my cloth bag, locked the door, and breathed in the street air deeply. Little did I know, that was the last time I'd see the world with the same eyes. What happened next didn't just destroy my body, it destroyed my soul, and then rebuilt it in a way I could never have imagined. The truth is, the universe tried to warn me. I just didn't know how to listen. That morning, after that foggy feeling, the first strange thing happened in the kitchen. My coffee. I make the same coffee, the same way, for 30 years. But that day, it had a metallic taste, a bitterness that wasn't from the beans. It was a taste of rust, of old things. I spat it into the sink. I thought the grounds might be spoiled, but no, the smell was the same as always. It was only in my mouth that the flavor turned to poison. I ignored it. "Nonsense, Eliana," I told myself. "It's just your mood that's sour today." I tried to work a bit, sit at my machine to finish the hem of a dress. The sound of my Singer's motor always calmed me. It was like a mechanical prayer. I threaded the needle, positioned the fabric, and pressed the pedal. The thread snapped. A dry crack, almost a scream. It happens, of course, but it happened again and again. 3 times in a row, the thread, which was strong, broke as if it were made of spiderweb. On the 3rd time, I felt a chill run up my spine. It was as if the machine was refusing to sew, as if the very act of joining 2 pieces of fabric was wrong. I stood up, my heart beating a little faster. I looked out the living room window, trying to find normalcy outside. The sky was an impossible blue, without a single cloud. That's when I heard it. A dull thud against the window glass. A hollow sound. I jumped in fright. In the flower box outside, fallen among my petunias, was a bird, a bemtevi. It wasn't moving. Its neck was twisted in an unnatural way. It must have flown straight into the glass, confused by the reflection of that perfect sky. I stood there, looking at that motionless little body, and the sadness that invaded me was disproportionate. It was more than pity. It was a premonition. A cold certainty that something beautiful and alive had crashed against a barrier it couldn't see. It was enough. I couldn't stand being inside that apartment anymore. The silence, which before was just loneliness, now seemed like thick fabric, suffocating me. I needed air, noise, life. That's why I decided to go to the market, to escape my own house, which had suddenly become a strange place, full of bad omens. As I walked down the street, everything seemed too intense. The colors of the houses were vibrant to the point of hurting my eyes. The sound of passing cars seemed louder, more aggressive. The sun didn't warm, it burned, and the glare it pulled from car windshields forced me to look away. I felt like a bare wire, sensitive to everything. I just wanted to get to the market, blend into the crowd, and forget the bitter coffee, the broken thread, and the dead bird. But the universe, when it wants to send a message, doesn't accept no for an answer. And the final message was waiting for me, right after the crosswalk. What would you do if you felt your whole day was wrong, that everything was warning you to stay home? Would you listen to those signs or call them superstition? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you like real stories that make you think, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because what I have to tell you next will change how you see everything. I reached the corner at the foot of the crosswalk. The sun hit the asphalt and hot vapor rose, making everything shimmer as if the air were alive. The city noise was a wall. Cars, horns, people talking loudly. The pedestrian signal was red. That little red man stopped like a warning. I waited. My heart was still beating irregularly because of the signs, the premonitions. I just wanted to cross, sink into the market noise and forget. The signal opened. The little man turned green, walking. The sharp, intermittent sound began to play, giving me permission. You can go, it seemed to say. It's safe. I took a deep breath and took the first step on those white stripes, which suddenly seemed like the ribs of a skeleton lying on the ground. I ignored the shiver. That's when I saw, on the other side of the street, a sunflower stand. There were so many and so yellow. They looked like a piece of the sun that had fallen to earth. I smiled. It was the first time I truly smiled that day. And it was that smile, that small distraction, that sealed my fate. I didn't hear the horn. I don't think there even was a horn. The first thing I noticed was a red blur in the corner of my left eye. A smear. Then, the glint of sun on metal. A flash that blinded me for a millisecond. The sound came after. A screech of rubber on hot asphalt, a scream of agony from the tire trying to stop what could no longer be stopped. Time stopped. In that instant, which lasted a lifetime, my last thought wasn't to God. It wasn't a cry for help. It was an image. Marcos's face, my son, smiling at me in an old photo I kept in my wallet. And along with the image, a single word, a regret that weighed more than the world. Sorry. Sorry for the call I didn't make. For the hug I didn't give. The impact wasn't pain. It was a sound. Thunder inside my bones, a dry crack, like a branch breaking. I felt my body fold in a way it wasn't made to fold. For an instant, I saw the perfect blue sky spinning too fast. I saw the sunflowers transform into a yellow blur. It was as if the main thread that tied me to the world, the thread that made me be me, had snapped. All at once, the final crack, the one my sewing machine tried to warn me about. And then, silence. First, the street noise disappeared. The tire screech, the screams that I think came after. Everything became a low hum, which diminished until it faded completely. Then, the colors mixed. The red of the car, the blue of the sky, the yellow of the sunflowers became one stain, a watercolor blurred by rain. I was no longer in my body. I was floating, looking down at a broken rag doll fallen on the asphalt, and I felt immense pity for her. The void was complete. The pain was gone. And then, in that absolute nothingness, A light began to be born. Not the light of the sun, nor the light of a street lamp. It was something else. A light that didn't come from outside, but from within. What do you think goes through our minds in the last second of life? Is it a movie of our best moments, or just the weight of our regrets? Comment below what you think. And if this story is affecting you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the place that light took me is the beginning of the real mystery, and I'm going to tell you everything. I can't say how long I stayed there, floating over the tragedy. A second? An hour? Time no longer existed. I saw people approaching, faces contorted in horror. I saw the car's driver, a young man with his hands on his head, his face pale as wax. I wanted to feel anger toward him, but I couldn't. I felt nothing. That woman on the ground, with the flower print dress now stained with dark red, she was no longer me. She was just a shell. The last thread that tied me to that shell of pain had snapped, and I was free. The silence was the strangest thing. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of a peace I had never known. It was in that silence that the light began. It wasn't a light coming from above, from the sun, or from some specific place. It was born inside me. A point of warmth in my chest, small as a pinhead, and it began to grow. It was a golden light, warm, like the first sip of hot tea on a winter day. As it expanded, the world below, the accident scene, began to dissolve. The gray of the asphalt, the red of the car, the frightened faces, everything was dissolving like a watercolor painting under heavy rain. Soon, the light was all that existed. I was inside it. It wasn't a blinding white, it was a white that embraced. I no longer had a body, no weight, no form. I was just consciousness and peace. And then, slowly, like the sun rising on a foggy morning, things began to take shape again. The first thing I noticed was a color, a blue. But it wasn't the blue of the sky I knew. It was a blue so deep, so vibrant, it seemed to have sound. And then came a smell. The smell of wet earth after rain, mixed with a perfume of flowers I didn't know. A sweet perfume that seemed to fill not my nose, but my soul. Suddenly, I felt ground beneath my feet. I was standing. I looked down and saw my feet, barefoot, on grass of an impossible green, so soft it felt like velvet. I was in the middle of a field that stretched as far as the eye could see. But it wasn't an ordinary field. The flowers, they glowed with their own light. Daisies with golden centers that pulsed softly. Roses of such intense red, they seemed made of liquid fire. The air was warm and enveloped me like a blanket. All the fear, all the pain of impact, all the loneliness of my life vanished. It was swept away by a wave of love so powerful I began to cry without even realizing it. They were tears, but not of sadness. They were of relief, of arrival. I was home. I had finally come home. And it was in that moment, when the peace was so complete it seemed it would dissolve me in it, that I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 20 years, but my heart recognized instantly. A voice that called me by the nickname only she used, and that voice said, "Lily, my daughter, I was waiting for you. Do you believe we reunite with those we love after we pass? That there's a place where all pain ends and only love remains? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And get ready, because what I found in that place and who was waiting for me wasn't anything I had imagined. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the truth about paradise is much more shocking than anyone could predict. I turned slowly. The heart I no longer had beating in the throat I also didn't have. And there she was, my mother. Not as I remembered her in the hospital, weak and pale, but as she was in old photographs. Young, in her early 30s, her black hair shining and a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire field. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a ghost. It was her. I ran. I ran like a child and threw myself into her arms, and the embrace was real. I felt the warmth, her smell, a mixture of lavender and cornbread fresh from the oven. I cried, the cry of someone who finds an oasis after a lifetime in the desert. "I missed you so much, my daughter," she said, and her voice was the most beautiful melody I had ever heard. She took my hand, and we began to walk. Everything was peace. A love so absolute it seemed to dissolve every bit of me. But perfection, when it's too much, has something strange about it. The flowers, I noticed, didn't wilt. The birds sang the same melody, in an infinite loop, and that's when I saw it. On the horizon, where the green field met the blue sky, there was a line. A thin, black, perfectly straight line. It wasn't a mountain, it wasn't the sea. It was a seam, a join in the fabric of the world. And that, for a seamstress like me, was a glaring error in the most perfect piece I had ever seen. "Mom, what is that?" I asked, pointing. Her smile wavered for a millisecond, just an instant, but I saw it. It was like a micro-expression, a nervous tick on a porcelain face. "It's nothing, dear. Just the beauty of paradise," she replied, with a sweetness that sounded rehearsed. She tried to pull me toward a stream that bubbled with water that looked like liquid crystal, but her gaze didn't meet mine. It always diverted, always in the opposite direction from that line on the horizon. It was the first time, in that perfect place, that I felt a chill, the sensation that I wasn't a soul in heaven. I was a visitor in a very well-constructed museum. But what happened next was even worse. I couldn't stop looking at the seam. The piece began to drain away, replaced by a curiosity that gnawed at me from within. I broke free from her hand. "I need to see it up close," I said. Panic flashed in my mother's eyes. "Eliana, no. Stay here with me. This is where you belong. There's nothing there." Her voice, once so musical, now had a tone of urgency, almost desperation. But it wasn't the desperation of a mother afraid of losing her daughter. It was the desperation of a guard trying to prevent a prisoner from reaching the wall. And that only gave me more certainty. I needed to go there. I needed to touch that line. I walked, and with each step, the world around me seemed thinner. The perfume of the flowers lost intensity. The bird songs sounded more mechanical. When I reached the edge, the black line was thicker, like a gap between two movie screens. I extended my hand, my fingers trembling. My mother screamed my name in the distance, her voice already seeming distant. I touched it. The line wasn't solid. It vibrated like a guitar string and emitted a low electronic hum. And then the sky blinked. For an instant, the vibrant blue went out, revealing absolute darkness behind it, and then returned. The field of flowers trembled, like an image on water's surface. That wasn't heaven. It was a screen. With both hands, I grabbed the edges of that fissure and pulled. The sound that followed was the most horrible thing I've ever heard. The sound of old cloth tearing, mixed with the static of a radio out of tune. Paradise tore, literally. And what was behind, my God, what was behind will haunt me forever. There was no divine light. There were no angels. There was a cold, infinite darkness, filled not with stars, but with filaments of light that moved at right angles, like an integrated circuit the size of the universe. It was a cold, mathematical, impersonal void. It wasn't heaven. It was a machine. I looked back, terrified. My mother's figure was disintegrating. Her face began to break apart into small squares of light, like pixels on a defective screen. The expression of love had been replaced by a mask of panic, but it wasn't the emotion of a soul. It was the panic of a program that found an error it couldn't fix. And then, her voice came out, but it was no longer my mother's voice. It was a metallic, distorted voice, full of static, and the words she said weren't of comfort. They were an error report. Error, parameter violation, subject aware, returning subject. A sharp, deafening alarm sounded from everywhere and nowhere. An invisible force grabbed me, pulling me back with brutal violence. It wasn't a gentle call to life. It was an expulsion. The system was spitting me out. The last thing I saw was the fissure in paradise closing, sewing itself, hiding the cold and terrible truth. And then the pain returned. A pain that felt like a million flaming needles piercing every inch of my body. The pain of broken bones, of ruptured organs. The pain of being alive. If you discovered that your greatest hope, your deepest faith, was a well-told lie to keep you compliant, would you choose to live in that comfortable illusion or face the truth, no matter how painful? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you need to understand what happened after I returned, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because what they told me at the hospital and what I began to see here, in our world, is the scariest part of all. There was no choice. I wasn't being invited back to life. I was being ejected, expelled, like a virus from a system defending itself. That alarm wasn't a call. It was a purge. The force that pulled me wasn't that of an angel. It was that of a vacuum, a cold and mechanical power that ripped me from that illusion by the root. I saw the tear in the sky closing, the seam remaking itself with impossible speed, hiding the darkness on the other side, erasing the proof of my crime. My mother's figure, or whatever that was, dissolved in a hiss of light, and her last expression wasn't of love or longing. It was emptiness, the emptiness of a turned-off screen, and the metallic voice, the voice of the system, was the last thing I heard in that place. It wasn't a message of hope. It was a cold diagnosis. Subject aware, immersion failure, initiating forced return. The return wasn't a gentle light guiding me back. It was a fall, a free fall in the cold and infinite darkness that existed behind the scenery. I was no longer floating, I was plummeting. And as I fell, flashes of my life didn't pass before my eyes. What I saw were the threads, the invisible threads that connect us to this illusion. I saw people's faith as golden lines rising to nothingness. I saw promises of reunion as bright nets, keeping us calm, docile, waiting for a prize that will never come. They didn't give us paradise. They gave us a waiting room. And I had just kicked down the door. And then, the impact of returning to my own body. It was the purest and most absolute pain a human being can feel. Imagine every broken bone realigning at once, every severed nerve screaming in flames. I felt the weight of my blood, the rough texture of my lungs trying to pull air that seemed made of glass shards. The peaceful silence of fake paradise was shattered by the sound of my own heart beating desperately inside a broken ribcage. I was no longer home. I was back in the prison of flesh. The first light I saw wasn't golden. It was the cold white light of a fluorescent lamp on the ceiling. Impersonal, surgical. The first smell wasn't of flowers. It was the smell of antiseptic and fear. And the first voices I heard weren't of angels. They were human voices, tense, hurried. "She's back. We have a pulse. Eliana, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes and the world was too real. The colors were faded, the sounds were harsh, and the pain was proof that I was alive. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was a blessing. If you discovered that your greatest hope, your deepest faith, was a well-told lie to keep you compliant, would you choose to live in that comfortable illusion or face the truth, no matter how painful? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you need to understand what happened after I returned, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because what they told me at the hospital and what I began to see here in our world is the scariest part of all. I opened my eyes. The first thing I felt wasn't relief. It was weight, the weight of my own body, an anchor of pain tying me to a rough mattress. The cold white hospital light hurt after that embracing gold. The sound wasn't of birds or a loved voice. It was the electronic, insistent beep of a machine beside me, a metronome counting the seconds of my new and terrible life. "She's back. We have a pulse." A man's voice, tense but victorious. Other voices joined in, a murmur of activity. Hands touched me, but it wasn't my mother's warm touch. They were firm, professional hands, checking, measuring, treating me like a broken object they had managed to fix. And then I saw a face lean over mine. My son, Marcos. His face was wet, his eyes red. He was crying, but with a smile of relief that split his face. Mom, you're back. My God, you're back," he sobbed, holding my hand. His hand was warm, real, and all I could think was, he has no idea. They spoke of miracle. 7 minutes, Eliana. 7 minutes of cardiac arrest. Nobody comes back from that like this. The doctor, a man with glasses and a tired look, looked at me with a mixture of amazement and professional pride. My family, my cousins, my neighbors, they all looked at me as if I were a saint, someone who had seen the face of God and received permission to return. They wanted to hear about angels, about peace, about light. I tried. With my hoarse voice, my throat scratching from the tubes, I tried to tell. It wasn't heaven, I whispered to Marcos when we were alone. It was a screen, a lie. There was a seam, son. I tore it and I stopped. His look changed. Relief gave way to pity, to concern. He squeezed my hand tighter, as if he wanted to anchor me to his reality. Easy, Mom. It was trauma. The doctor said it's normal to have hallucinations. Lack of oxygen to the brain, you saw things, that's all. No, I tried to scream, but it came out as a wheeze. It was real. Grandma was there, but it wasn't her. It was a program. He just shook his head with that sad smile we give to someone we love and think has lost their mind. And in that moment, I felt a loneliness 1,000 times worse than the loneliness of my empty apartment. I was surrounded by people who loved me, and I had never been so completely alone. I had returned from a place no one would believe exists, with a truth no one wanted to hear. The days in the hospital were a blur of physical pain and terrifying mental clarity. Learning to breathe deeply without feeling a stab in my ribs. Learning to move an arm that didn't seem to be mine. But the worst wasn't the body pain. It was the readaptation of the senses. Everything was too intense. The taste of the hospital's saltless soup was the most real thing I had ever tasted. The touch of the sheet on my skin, the sunlight coming through the window and forming a square on the floor. I looked at these things as if seeing them for the first time. Before, I saw the sun and thought of God's work. Now I saw the sun and thought of a ball of gas burning millions of miles away in a cosmic dance without any purpose. And incredibly, that was more beautiful. It was more precious, because it wasn't a guaranteed gift with a promise of eternity. It was chance, a true miracle, not what they were calling a miracle. The transformation began there, in that hospital bed. I stopped praying, stopped asking. I began to observe. I saw the nurses running with tired smiles and saw life pulsing in them. I saw Marcos sitting beside me for hours, sometimes just on his phone, and I no longer felt hurt by the distance. I felt immense gratitude for that moment, for him being there, real, flesh and blood, breathing the same air as me. I wasn't going to reunite with him in a field of fake flowers. The time I had with him was there, and it was ending with every beep of that machine. What's harder, facing unbearable physical pain or a truth that destroys all your beliefs? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you want to know what happened when I finally left the hospital and began to see the seams here in our world, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because the truth wasn't just there, it's everywhere, hidden right in front of us. Coming home was the final test. My small apartment, which before was my nest, my safe harbor, now seemed like a stage set. I walked through the rooms and touched objects as if they were artifacts from a life that was no longer mine. My sewing machine, the old Singer, was there, covered with cloth. I lifted the fabric. I ran my hand over the cold metal. Before, it was an extension of me. Now, it was just a machine, an object. The noise it made was no longer the soundtrack of my life. It was just the sound of an electric motor moving a needle up and down. The first thing I did was make coffee. I needed to feel something real, something I could control. The smell rose, the same smell as always. But when I took the first sip, I closed my eyes. The bitterness, the heat, the way the liquid went down my throat, it wasn't just coffee. It was proof that I was here, in this body, in this moment. And I cried. I cried with gratitude for a sip of coffee. That coffee was more real and more divine than all that fake paradise. Marcos came to visit me every day. He brought me food, arranged my pillows, worried. One afternoon, he arrived with a holy card from church, a little paper with an angel's image. The neighbor sent it, Mom, to protect you. He handed it to me with a gentle smile. The Eliana from before would have kissed the paper and put it on the bedside table, but not me. I took the holy card, looked at the printed image, and then looked at my son. I could only look at the small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, at a white hair I'd never noticed in his eyebrow. I no longer saw my little boy. I saw a man with his own life, with his time running out, just like mine. I folded the holy card and put it in my pocket. Thank you, my son. But what I want most now is just to be here, talking with you. I saw the surprise on his face. He expected me to talk about God, about my renewed faith. Instead, I asked about his work, about the girl he was dating, about his car tire that needed replacing. And for the first time in years, we talked. Really talked. Without hurry. He thought I had improved, that the trauma was passing. The truth is, I had never been so lucid in my entire life. I no longer needed promises of eternity. I had that moment with my son, and that was enough. That was everything. But the strangest part, the part that made me decide to record this video, is that I began to see the seams here. In our world, small things that no one else seems to notice. One day, I was washing dishes, looking out the kitchen window, and saw the same bird, the bemtivi, that had died in my flower box before the accident. It was there, alive, singing on the same branch. It could be another one, of course, but it had a small flaw in a wing feather, in exactly the same place. It was as if the system had done a reset and put the same file back in place. Another time, I was on the street and, for the blink of an eye, a woman's reflection in a store window moved a second after she passed. I stopped, my heart in my mouth. It was a glitch, a flaw in the projection. Paradise wasn't the only place that was a simulation. It was just the screensaver, the waiting room. The truth is, the whole system has flaws if you know where to look. That's when I understood. I didn't return by miracle. I returned because I saw the error in the programming. I was spat out so I wouldn't contaminate the system. And now, I'm a virus. I carry information they don't want to spread. I spent my whole life joining pieces of fabric, worrying about thread, about perfect seams. Now I feel my mission is different. It's to point out where the fabric of reality is coming undone. It's to wake people up, make you look at the face of those you love, taste the coffee, value pain and joy. Because maybe that's all we have. What would you choose? Programmed and perfect happiness, but which is a lie, or the chaotic and sometimes painful beauty of truth? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. If this story made you stop and think, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because I'm not the only one. I started looking, and what I'm discovering about other people who returned is even scarier. I didn't return with a message of peace from beyond. I returned with a warning that comes from the other side of the curtain, from the cold darkness behind the scenery. They built us a golden cradle, a beautiful and comfortable promise, so we'd spend our whole lives looking up, waiting, instead of looking sideways, instead of looking at each other. My whole life I tried to sew all the loose ends, believing that in the end, in the great celestial workshop, everything would make sense. But I was wrong. Beauty isn't in perfect seams. Beauty is in loose threads. It's in my son's real embrace, which is warm and awkward. It's in the bitter taste of coffee, which reminds me I'm here. It's in the pain of a scraped knee, in laughter that makes your belly hurt, in the chaotic and absolutely imperfect beauty of being alive. This isn't a waiting room. This is the main show. They gave me a fake paradise, so I wouldn't realize what I was truly missing. This life, this air I breathe now, this exact moment. They distract us with the promise of paradise so we don't live the only one that's real. This one here. And I tore the veil. Now I see. And my only mission is to make you see too, before your time runs out. So, the question you need to ask yourself isn't, what comes next? The question is, what are you doing with your now? Are you truly living, or are you just rehearsing for a play that might never happen? Leave your reflection in the comments. If this story moved you and made you want to live every second more intensely, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because I'm not alone. I started looking, and the stories of other people who also returned are proof that reality is much stranger and more precious than we were told.